All right, Mayor, 7:01, and you are live.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Okay. All right, hello, everyone. Tonight's meeting is going to be a presentation to our council and to the public about where we are at with the development of a new transit hub and also the restoration of the municipal parking garage on Market Street, which is connected to it. I want to give a little, this is a presentation for the council, open to the public. It's going to be about a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll leave about 30 minutes for questions and answers from council members. But first, before we go forward, I just want to give a little background to both the council, as a number of the council members were not on board when this process started, and to the general public who may be watching. What you're going to see tonight is really the result of a 5-year effort. It began in 2016 when we put together the conceptual plan for applying for the state of New York's very first downtown revitalization initiative. And two of the things that were identified in that planning process were, one is that our municipal parking garage, while it serves an important purpose, has aged over 50 years, and it needs some structural repairs as well as some aesthetic improvements. And I think anybody who parks in it regularly would agree with me that it's not the most attractive place or the most inviting place to park your car, not to mention the leaks that come through the roof and leave rust stains on your vehicle. I've had the experience myself of having to scrub those off. And the second item that was included was the need for what we called at the time, a multimodal transit hub in the city of Oneonta. And why is that needed? Well, we all know that currently our transit hub is a tiny little storefront on the front of Clinton Plaza on Main Street. The buses line up, parked parallel to the curb. That creates safety issues, traffic problems on a very busy intersection. There is no place for people waiting for the bus to board them outside of the weather. There is no office space for the OPT staff, and the waiting room is really not something that we could do a lot better than what we provide now for passengers waiting for a bus than that waiting room. In addition, forward thinking, by creating a transit hub, we hope to eventually make that a multimodal center where it could be a place to charge your electric car. It could be a place for taxi cabs to wait. It could be a place for bicycle racks and all forms of transportation all in one location. So as we move forward with our DRI plan and putting together different sources of funding, we have worked very hard recognizing that creation of a transit hub and the restoration of the parking garage are both very expensive endeavors. And so over the last few years, we've worked very hard to try to put together some funding that could help us support both of these endeavors. We were successful at having $3 million of our downtown revitalization initiative go towards the effort of the parking garage, the restoration of the parking garage, creation of some of the walkways around it and some of the streetscape improvements with the concept that a transit hub could be either part of it or adjacent to it. And we were successful at putting together about $5.5 million in a combination of New York State Department of Transportation funding, Federal Transportation Authority funding, and New York State Consolidated Funding Application funding. And a lot of people helped in getting that done. And I want to just take a few moments to acknowledge them. And also I did not mention $500,000 in Restore New York funding, the purpose of which is to demolish the abandoned building on the corner of Market and Chestnut and Lower Chestnut Street, the Chestnut Street extension. So I just want to acknowledge, this is an effort that took a lot of teamwork, a lot of people working very hard to make it happen. And I just want to acknowledge them. Actually, the very first person that I heard mention the need for a transit hub was shortly after I took office in 2015. And that was our former transportation director, Paul Patterson, who mentioned to me the need for a transit hub as opposed to what we have now on Market Street. To work on the funding, our former finance director, Meg Hungerford, was instrumental on working with the New York State Department of Transportation. Otsego Now, and the former executive director of Otsego Now, which was Sandy Mathis, was instrumental in partnering with us on both the consolidated funding application funding as well as the Restore New York funding. And I have to thank Senator Schumer, who advocated very, very strongly on our behalf for the funding from the Federal Transit Authority to help support the construction of the transit hub. And during the last couple of years, coordinating all of this and overseeing the design and development process were our city engineer, Greg Mattice, our community development director, Judy Pangman, and our Oneonta Transit director, Dave Hoteling, all worked very hard on putting this together. About a year ago, I think it was, we put out an RFP for a consultant who has expertise in development of transportation facilities. We received a number of qualified proposals. We interviewed the top proposals. We reviewed them very carefully. And out of that, we selected Wendel as the organization, the outfit that we thought was best equipped and most in tune with what the city of Oneonta needed to work with us in the design of both the rehab of the parking garage and the design of a new transit hub. So tonight, you're going to see what is the result of nearly a year's worth of work. I think it's almost a year since we started. And I'm going to turn this over to Liz Colvin. She has been the project manager for this initiative for Wendel. She's going to give you a little bit of background. She's going to show you some of the designs that have been developed, some of the options, and how we arrived at them. And then she's going to open it up to questions from our council members. So with that, I give you Liz Colvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here tonight. Wendel, myself, on the line from our team, Sean Beachy. We actually interviewed with the city for the Transit Hub conceptual planning study. And we actually were very grateful to have the opportunity to work with everyone. I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Wendel, just for those who may not be familiar. But as you can see on the slide, we do span the nation. And I tell you that because our public transit division at Wendel is actually pretty well known nationally. And we have a strong presence in New York State. Also how I met David at some conferences. So therefore, we, as Mr. Mayor mentioned, did put in a proposal and were retained by the city to complete this study. Just a little bit about our team, so you have some familiarity, but you'll see Sean. We also had a landscape architect and an urban planner who really walked the entire city of Oneonta, taking photos and gathering context and whatnot. And then we had what we call our engineering team, mechanical, electrical, and structural. And everyone was on site with us when we kicked this project off, about maybe a year and a half ago now. It was early last year. We also use a consultant for our cost estimating efforts, who we work with regularly, especially on transit projects, and they're called Costing Services Group. And also, just as a note, as the mayor mentioned, we'll be doing some Q&A at the end. If there are any specific questions tonight that come across that are pointed or technically specific, which we may not be able to answer for you tonight, we will definitely get that answered for you from our team. So the agenda. So for those of you who've had a chance to review the draft report that we put together on this year and a half's worth of work and effort and collaboration with the city, tonight we're going to summarize all that for you. We're going to just remind everyone what the project goals were, take you through sort of the cliff notes of our process, talk about the garage assessment and the condition of it and the rehabilitation. And then Sean's going to get into more of the program and the design and the alternatives, and then the final options and how we arrived at those with a Q&A session at the end. So let's talk about the goals for a moment. As the mayor mentioned, the city is looking for a new consolidated multimodal hub, potentially also including a welcome center on Market Street. In addition, rehabilitation of the parking garage, the existing parking garage on the corner of Market and Chestnut. Then we also made a point to take special consideration to the other DRI adjacent projects in the area and how these would all work together. Specifically the Market Street streetscape, Moeller Plaza, Clinton Plaza. And lastly, accessibility and connectivity. Bringing people from Main down Chestnut to Market and from Water to Chestnut down to Market, and really how accessible routes and how we were going to connect and really bring people back and forth. So why a new transit hub? And Mr. Mayor touched on some of this, but operational efficiencies is always a top item. Accessibility is huge. So accessible spaces and routes for your public and your riders. And not only that, but giving them an enhanced experience and enhanced service by providing a welcoming space for not only them, but also for visitors of Oneonta, and as well as your inner city buses in addition to your local. Most importantly, probably, is that most times transit hubs actually spur community and economic development opportunities. So when they say, when you build it, they will come, rings true. A little bit about our process. So back in, I think, March of 2019, what we did an immersion with the city. And what that means is that we spent, I think, about almost a week, pretty much in and out of the city building, walking the sites, walking the area, and really taking in and gathering information, and having a series of meetings where we talked about the things we went over, the goals, the project itself, what the city was looking to get out of this, and really how we could do that, how we could work together to do that. We met with not only the city officials and others that you see in the photo, but also some of your inner city carriers, and other representatives around the city. We visited the Welcome Center, and we just made sure to really, immerse ourselves in the city of Oneonta. As I mentioned, we did the site visits and observations. We walked and we talked, and we really did some visual observations of whether they were vacant sites or they were buildings, and we went in and actually visually observed them, including the parking garage and the conditions assessment of the garage itself, and the validity of rehabilitation versus a demolition and rebuild. What that then allowed us to do is we spent time with the city to develop the project program. And really, the program for the project is a list of the needs and then your wishes, and how that merges together, and what does that look like. And that really drives the size of a new facility and the function. And Sean will touch on that more in the presentation. From that, we're able to develop a prototype facility and site layout plan, which basically is sort of like a test fit. So, okay, it's for example, 6,000 square foot building, and we need 7 bus bays, and here are the variety of ways that we could lay this out. And so from that, we were able to essentially drop what we call test fits on the different site alternatives. And that was quite a lengthy process. And not only did we do that on site during the immersion, but that continued well after, as we kind of checked other viable sites as well and different iterations of all of these alternatives. And really, we used a fatal flaw assessment when we were narrowing down viable options of where this new transit hub could go and what did it look like for the parking structure itself. And really what a fatal flaw assessment is basically we used pass or fail on each site. There were pros and cons, and where the cons outweighed the pros, it was more so a fail. However, the majority of the site alternatives we went through, some sort of fatal flaw had come about. And so therefore you sort of hit a wall and you put that one aside and you continue with your group that have pros, that don't have sort of major blocking or significant stopping points, and you continue with your site selection process. Then you come up with your final options, which pretty much are your highest passing options, and develop concept alternatives, or what you saw from the site plans and the renderings in the report. A little bit about the parking garage assessment. So as I mentioned before, our team that you saw on the slide in the beginning, we did a visual observation. It also did some desktop due diligence. So we collected any documents you had on the garage, reports that were done, and so on. As most of you know, that this garage was constructed in 1975. And the way that we handle our conditions assessments is that we typically grade them. And it ranges from poor to good, so poor, fair, good. And our architect and our different engineers, they go through the building and they visually assess and observe the conditions of components of the building. And actually, you can read more about the parking garage assessment in section 3 of the report. I'm going to skip down here. Obviously, the garage itself needs quite a bit of improvement, but it is certainly not, it is not doable, let's say. So although our main concern is really accessibility and the non-operational elevator shaft, and really having limited ways to access that garage itself, that would be one of the major items that to rehabilitate the garage would need to be looked at and then designed to make sure that it was accessible in every way possible. Improvements include structural, electrical, plumbing, and then obviously the overall appearance. As far as structural goes, you might be surprised to hear, but the bones of it are actually really strong. And when I say that, I mean the structural foundations and the steel columns themselves. There is, and the plain eye can tell, floor beams, concrete slab, and expansion joint repairs that do have to occur throughout. We would need to replace the storm drainage system, and another significant item here as far as the assessment goes is that your sanitary pump station is right out front of the garage on Market Street. And so that would need to either be maintained or I guess relocated, depending on the amount of work done here for the rehabilitation. And lastly, electrical. So there was a good effort made, and you guys replaced a lot of the lighting to LED lighting, but there's some areas that actually still require, including the stairwells, some lighting replacements, and then things like raceways, wiring, receptacles all need to be either repaired or improved. Ultimately, though, overall, the general intent of the assessment and the general, I think, resolution was pretty much you guys range in fair to good. So there's some areas of poor conditions, but overall, the conditions assessment proved that you're in a fair to good rating. Now I'm going to turn this over to Sean, where he can talk a little bit more about the program and the design.
Thanks, Liz. So there's two parts to the program that we're looking at right now. So one is the facility program and the other is the site. So the facility generally is about 6,500 square feet for this building. Now, there's many different pieces that go into this, and I'm just going to highlight a few of the main ones. One is the intercity bus office space, so for trailways, waiting area for both OPT and trailways passengers, again, to be able to wait for their bus outside of the elements. Restrooms, and also bus driver restrooms separately, so if they have to take a quick break on their route, they can use it when they get to the transit hub. And then on the site, and many have mentioned this before, I think Liz said it, 7 bus bays. Now, the one thing I want to point out on this is the 7 bus bays are what we call sawtooth bus bays. Now, it's different than what you have if you go out to your main street now and you see the buses, that's called nose to tail. Nose to tail has a operational restriction that each bus really has to wait for the bus in front of it to pull out. They can't all pull out individually. And that can hurt your headways, that can hurt your timing of your buses, because obviously you can get stuck. Sawtooth configuration does not rely on the bus in front of you to pull out. So each bus can come in and leave individually. That helps a lot with timing. And one of the best things on this, an informed passenger is safer. So it's designated bus bays no matter what. The same bus route goes to the same bay every time, which is different than nose to tail, because the first one in pulls in first, the next one pulls in, so you're not always in the same spot. So again, that's an important element to this. And again, sawtooth configuration, I will tell you, by far is the most operationally efficient and the easiest for a passenger to navigate because they know where to go. The other thing is you'll see transfer platforms. What that means is basically a raised area where you would transfer between buses and then between platforms to get to another bus. And they're handicap accessible because either it's a curb cut or we do raised walkways going across. So again, we do that in the most efficient way and the safest way. You want people to cross on the ends where the buses can see you. So everything we do is about safety on this. Kiss and ride. Now, kiss and ride is I guess, a fun way to say drop off. You pull up to an area, somebody's going to be taking a bus, whether it's inner city or a city bus, give them a kiss, off they go to the transit center. A taxi area for waiting for people coming, and then public space, outdoor public space would be included in this.
Sean, you're
sorry about that. As Liz said, we reviewed a lot of different sites, some separately, some we put together to see if we could make the program fit. Again, we went through a lot of different test fits on all of these to see what could work. And some were, again, just hand sketches to see maybe there's an option here, maybe it can work, and just a pie in the sky as you're walking around looking. If you want to go to the next one, Liz, I'll point out some of the site sketches. So again, test fits are, we take a piece of trace paper, we lay it over, we draw on our buses, we check our turns. Again, these aren't just pretty pictures when we draw them. We know what it takes to make a bus turn, and that is important. So everything we're doing is functional. So we're not just drawing things down here and saying, oh, this could work. No, we make sure it works when we're showing a sketch. And you saw that on an earlier image when you saw those turns. That's a bus turning. That's a software we use to make sure everything would work. But again, these are sketches to kind of validate the site. And as Liz said, sometimes you go through and you say, okay, well, this site doesn't work. Is there another way to make it work? Would it be adjacent properties, or is there a way to combine different sites? So again, all of this was looked at. It wasn't just individually looked at it. We looked at other creative ways to make it work. And so Liz mentioned immersion. So this is one of the most important parts to us as architects, to try to understand the cities we work in. And I'll tell you a quick story. When Liz and I first pulled up to Oneonta, we were at Main and Chestnut. And I remember when we turned and looked down Main Street, we're like, this is absolutely stunning. It really is. What a beautiful Main Street. It's like what you want a Main Street to look like. So that gives us this whole other context into proportions and details that are unique to this city. And that's really important because when we design a building, it's designed for you in the public, right? It's designed for the city. It's not based on what we think it should be. We're picking up all these contexts, we're learning from all these things, and that's how we're coming up with stuff. So when you see our designs, it's based on a lot of this understanding of the city and just walking around, as Liz said, and just kind of enjoying the city in the context. And inspirational images, as we also start to design, we start thinking of some different things and maybe get some people to help understand of what they like and don't like as we're talking. And one thing I want to point out is the Oneonta signage that they've got, which is really kind of fun. And it made us think of what could you do with that sign and how could we incorporate it into the site? And you see the love sign there where people are in it taking photos. You could see that done with this Oneonta sign. Big sign, people crawling on it, doing things. It could become very unique and interesting and a great way to incorporate into the site. You also see the brick with the kind of bay doors down there. There's great weather in New York, right? Summers are wonderful. Spring and fall can be a little cold at times, yes, but still beautiful. So how do we get the outside in and the inside out? So that's through bay doors and kind of opening it in, especially on some of these corners. How do we make it more of an active area? And then the last thing I'm going to point out to you here is kind of see the crowds of people on the hill looking down for a public event. Granted, this is a large city right there that I'm showing you, but the idea is on one of the sites we're going to show you, it has an elevation change, and there's an opportunity for this. And well, I'll get into my kind of the thought process on this in a little bit if you want to go to the next one, Liz. So getting into options, option one focuses solely on the parking garage, the existing parking garage, integrating the transit hub into it. So the transit hub would be located on the first and part of the second floor of the parking garage. And along with the 7 bus bays would be between Chestnut and Water Street Extension along Market Street. As you saw the test fits there that I showed you before. Again, so the bus bays are there. You relocate your car entrance to the east side of the parking garage, or should I say southeast side. The thing to this is the taxi and the kiss and ride would be on the first floor of the car parking garage. So the one thing I want to point out to you here, not that this is a fatal flaw, but you do lose some car parking spaces on the first and second floor of the parking garage because of this, because you're taking up the space for the transit center and for the drop off and the taxi. So that's just one thing to consider on this, but otherwise you also see the Trailways buses. If Liz, you can point out, they're just across the street on Market, a direct view from the transit hub down there. So if you want to go to the next slide, Liz, can show the renderings of this. So again, one thing you're going to notice is the vertical tower on this, and the tower is a new stair and new elevator shaft to help with the accessibility as Liz talked about before, but it's also incorporating part of the transit center into that facade. The other thing you will absolutely notice is that we've reskinned the parking garage, and what you see on the left-hand side is like a perforated metal panel that allows air and everything, helps it makes the garage look a lot nicer, but what we're doing is taking some historic images and putting it on that panel. It could be anything. It could be a different piece of artwork. What we're trying to do is say there's a way to enhance this garage very simply and really kind of create a new excitement about it, along with the new transit center that would be along Market Street. I'm gonna go to the next one. Thanks, Liz. So the other thing I want to point out on this is, again, as you're coming down Chestnut, you can kind of see it's really reshaping how it looks now along the one edge here. Again, going towards the tower for the main circulation and just really fixing up this street. But this leads us to option 2 of what were we missing on this? Because again, one of the things we're limited in the transit center is the height of the parking garage. We can't change that. It's there. So there's nothing we can do about that. And again, if you can imagine coming off an intercity bus, you're coming from another city and into Oneonta, you get off the bus, you want to be welcomed into the city. And you want the transit center to be emblematic of what Oneonta is. Right now, we know that could be improved, right? We know what the current intercity bus facility looks like. We want to improve that because there's a lot to offer in Oneonta. We want them to have that great first impression. So in option 2, we looked across the street on Chestnut to the building the mayor said, the vacant building that would be taken down. A new transit center would be built. And a couple of things I want to point out in this is this transit center really is trying to do a lot of different things to it. One, maintain the urban edge along Chestnut for the pedestrians. create a very active center along Market Street to help encourage, which are some really great buildings and great shops along Market Street next to the Performing Arts Center. And then also start to integrate that urban experience along the backside of Clinton Plaza, which has a lot of great shops. And we want to start to encourage it because right now there's a retaining wall, kind of just a blank spot there. But as Liz is pointing out, you see that green space in that upper left image. Imagine a berm like you saw in that earlier image. You're sitting there with your kids on the building. There's a movie screen at night. You come down there, the kids, you're having some popcorn. The kids are running around having a good time. You're downtown. All these families are there watching a movie, just enjoying themselves, hitting the stores, things like that. This is kind of my vision on this. And, as architects, this is what we do. How could we do it? Because I enjoy doing that with my kids, going out to a place like this and just having a fun movie night and enjoying yourself. We can see that. And this is a huge opportunity. We rarely get this. And this was exciting for us to have this opportunity. The other thing is this allows for future development. If a developer wanted to come in, you've got developable ready land that could join with the transit center and be unique and part of it, encourage transit use for the new building. So this is a really exciting opportunity. As you can see here in the design that Liz is showing you, we took elements of the historic fabric that you saw, proportions, and some of the materiality that you're seeing here, but also, again, we're not copying the past. This is about the future. We're designing a new building. So it has modern elements into it, but again, paying respect to the past historic architecture that is everywhere in Oneonta and truly beautiful. And we want to continue that and help strengthen it as we go forward. So this is one of the buildings, as you can see, but again, a lot of open windows, brick. And one thing I want to note is we mentioned about accessibility. When you come down Chestnut, it's a steep street. And if you are mobility impaired, it can be a tough street to get down. This building will help bridge that because it will have an elevator and stair in the building. So if somebody who is mobility impaired could use this building to get down to Market and again, frequent the shops that are down there. So again, this is about encouraging it. The last thing I'll leave you with this is that the parking garage would be, it would complement this design. So it slightly changed because again, remember the transit center would not be in the parking garage in this case. So they're going to kind of complement each other coming down the street, completely changing your experience walking down. You go to the next one, Liz. The last thing is the bus canopies, and this is just a really basic massing rendering, just so you get an understanding. The bus bays would be covered with canopies. Now these canopies are undulating. This is kind of inspired by just the terrain around us and the landscape and the mountains.
City of Hills.
Yes. So as you see it, you are covered when you get on the bus, when you get off the bus, when you get on your platform. You can imagine, and I've been there waiting for a bus and it's pouring rain and you're sitting there and your legs are getting soaked and then you got to go to work. So what this does, if you come off the bus, whether it's snowing, raining, if it's sunny or hot, you can at least wait for your bus out of the elements. But when you get off the bus, then you can put up your umbrella and you're not soaked by the time you do it. So it's really a great enhancement for transit riders and helping to encourage more transit use.
And I think it's important to note, and it's probably clear in the graphics, but it's important to state that the 7 bus bays would remain here on the Market Street front, in the front of the garage. So whether you retrofit the transit station, transit hub into the corner of the garage or place it across Chestnut on the corner of Market and Chestnut, there's still visual sight lines for safety, pedestrian crossings. Then your riders know when their buses arrived, in addition to all the great things that they have now and the technologies that have improved for signage and timing and whatnot of when your bus arrives. But both options allow for the bus bays to remain here where there's enough space and allow for people to be able to see and safely approach or disembark their bus. All right, so let's talk about costs for a moment. So as Sean mentioned, option 1 is the retrofit of the transit hub into the garage and then the rehabilitation of the garage itself. As I mentioned very early on in the presentation tonight, we did work with our a third-party cost estimator, costing services group, and it's a collaborative effort. We work back and forth with them. We provide them with the program and the square footages for what is going to be in this space, and then materiality improvements. We think about utilities, we think about phasing, we think about all those things that would have a cost, no matter which option you choose. And they therefore provide a cost estimate. We reconcile it with them. We go back and forth. And we end up with what are conceptual costs. And we're calling them conceptual because at this point in the process, this is still really pre-design. And so therefore, the costs are at a high level, like think 30,000 feet in the air level. There's a lot of room for refinement. As design progresses, you can start to really hone in on design elements and specificity of things, and really systems and things like that, so that you can sharpen your pencil and reassess costs, which we do throughout a design. But conceptuality wise, we also make sure to include a contingency percentage on these numbers. And it's quite a fair amount. In this case, we use, when it's a conceptual level design like this, we use a 25% contingency. And therefore it does factor in changes through design. It gives enough room for changes in design and for unforeseen conditions. So option one, totaling approximately 10.3 million. Option two is the rehabilitation of the garage, leaving the bus base still in front of the garage on market, but placing the transit hub on the corner of Market and Chestnut. And so therefore, the new build itself, the size between the two facilities, whether you're retrofitting it into the garage or you're building it new across the street, the main driver in the cost differential there of a new transit hub is the size. Lastly, option three, which we have not talked too much about, but we did mention, and this is actually a sketch of it on this slide. Option three is a complete demolition and rebuild of the garage with a transit hub on the first level of the garage, therefore leaving enough space above and then some parking levels on top of that. The
thing to point out on that, Liz, it would be higher than it currently is, because obviously transit takes out one floor of parking. So it's essentially 1 or 2 levels higher of a building as you do it to keep the same amount of parking.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. A couple items to note here are, there's a couple things working against you here, even though this is a really nice site. The grade, the slope change, the soils, of what we know of the soils at this point in time underneath, and therefore it drives a lot of, there's a good portion of your cost that right now is being assigned to foundations and underground work. So together, a new transit hub and garage is estimated at about 22.5. Sean, is there anything else you want to add here to cost?
No, I think the one thing to note in option one, like the difference between option 1 and 2, there's 2 things. One, as Liz said, there is a bigger transit hub in option 2. And the other one is in option 1, you do lose parking spaces. Incorporated into it. You might want to mention that, because that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. I understand there's a difference, but it's something you got to remember on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to wrap up here is, so we understand, we come from cities in similar size of Oneonta, a little bit larger, but still we understand that parking is at a premium, especially when you have nearby colleges. Cooperstown, your tourism's coming in for other reasons, and you've got visitors and things like that, summer camps for sports and all those good things that Oneonta gets. So we understand the importance of parking, and Sean's right, and thank you for pointing that out. The transit hub, as he mentioned, if it was within the garage, does take up a portion of the first floor and then part of the second. And actually, the accessible stair and elevator would also reach to the third floor, although there would be no building program up there. So you would lose some parking spaces, which we did address in the report. We sort of did an estimate based on what we knew at the time and the information we have. It wasn't a detailed part of the project scope, but we did give consideration to it as we planned for the sizing of how this would fit into the garage. Whereas with option 2, which is placing the transit hub across the street, would essentially allow the majority of those spaces to remain. Now, it is important also to note that overall, no matter option 1 or 2, we do recommend, just confirming size of the spaces, restriping, and therefore it may lay out slightly different than the cost, right, or excuse me, the counts of the spaces to date right now as documented. So with that, we wanted to allow some time and really some discussion as a Q&A. And before we open the floor, I do want to note that for public comment, this session is open. You can go to oneonta.ny.us, follow these instructions, click on the DRI Transit Hub Parking Garage, and then you can view a link that you can download the report. You can even watch the recording of this presentation. And you can submit comments or questions, which we will see and we will respond to as a design team and city together, to cityinfo@oneonta.ny.us. Public comment period is open from tonight after the meeting through 4 o'clock on Wednesday, September 30th. And then what we'll do is, as we review and respond, that'll sort of complete this report. We'll finalize it. We'll include comments and responses in the appendix, and we'll issue the final report. So with that, we'd love to hear from the council.
Liz, I'm not sure we can see everybody if they raise their hands, so maybe we want to put it back into non-screen sharing so we can see if somebody raised their hand.
That's a great idea, Mayor. Let me stop my share. All right. Thank you. Dave Risberger.
Yes, hi. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the hard work you did in this project. I think you've got given us some things to think about, and there's some really good ideas here. The question I have is you in your concept about the parking garage, I understand why you changed the entrance point for the second floor. But what I don't understand is why you changed the direction to enter it, and also the direction on Water Street, and if that's absolutely necessary, because I see that the way it's laid out, I could see 3 problematic areas. There's a lot of left-hand turns, and the direction of the traffic coming off the ramp and Water Street, you'd have possibly 2 cars either trying to merge or coming to the intersection at the same time, and both of them trying to make a left-hand turn into one lane. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And while we talk about this, I am just going to bring up the site plan image again and try to zoom in here without my screen going berserk. Okay. So a couple reasons. First and foremost, as we look at what I'll call the dance of bus circulation, vehicle circulation, pedestrians, bicyclists, safety is the number one, right? And so it actually is part of the reason why, as to what drove the relocation of the cars. Sorry, I'm losing my cursor here. Here we go. In and out of the garage. And really, that's honestly what started the sort of the reverse of what you've got going on now in the garage. Additionally, controlling the traffic and really reversing coming up that Water Street extension ramp and out Water Street the opposite way. You could come in Water Street. So what we allowed for was deliveries to come down Chestnut and into Water Street to still deliver to these businesses. This was the train of thought. And certainly this is, we are not married to this. This was just part of the initial thought process that we had as to why we reversed the flow here.
Yeah,
So
the thing is, you can see right here, as the buses turn in to get into their bays, and you have cars coming in and a few cars coming out, and it's the coming out that that's the trouble spot, right? Because you've got opposing traffic, and it's all about bus movements and making sure everything is clear and as concise as possible. Having more cars come out this way on Water Street Extension just adds to the complexity of the movements there. So for us, as Liz is saying, it's about safety and trying to simplify this area. And, you know, if we had other options, you know, we'd try to even separate it more, because again, one of the things we always try to do is separate bus movement from car movements. Because again, it just simplifies things and makes it safer. But in this case, we thought one of the best options was to kind of eliminate one and have the flow go up Water Street Extension, again, going in the parking garage and reverse flowing out and coming out here, as you noted. But again, as Liz said, it was about safety and trying to reduce the amount of complexity in a congested area.
I think I see what you're saying, and I'm realizing with the credit union, the way they have their traffic there, if we reverse the traffic, you'd actually have, instead of what we have now, is 2 outgoing groups of cars, you'd have 3 potentially.
right.
So yeah, that would be problematic. My suggestion is, if there's some way the entrances can be tweaked, or the exits up in the northeast corner can be tweaked a little bit and shifted, because as of right now, the way it would be is people are pulling out of the parking garage to make a left on Water Street. They could get T-boned by somebody coming up the ramp, potentially, unless that's is that complete flow through traffic there around the northeast corner.
Are you talking on Market, down here on Market?
Coming off Market and going into, let's say somebody's going toward the, oh yeah, it would be, somebody would be coming off Market, up the ramp, around the northeast corner to go in on the second floor of the garage, correct? Is that what they would have to do?
Yes,
No, they could
make a left to go in the garage here. That's
right.
Correct. And they come up.
Right. And if there's somebody that's, the way it's set up right now, if somebody's coming out of that garage, there's a chance of them getting smacked with a car coming around that corner. So if there's some way that entrance could be tweaked a little bit,
yeah,
coming out of the first
Absolutely.
floor.
Yeah, and these are, so
room.
this is absolutely part of great feedback that we would want, you know, and it's absolutely essential to this, because, you know, as you mentioned, both corners really have to be studied and thought through differently, right? Because it is a change of what you're doing today. And I'd be lying to you if I told you looked at it, you know, in super in depth yet. We haven't. So this is a great opportunity, you know, as it moves forward, those would be major considerations, because you don't want that. You want it, again, we talk about safety, we mean that, whether it's buses or cars or pedestrians, all are equal in safety, and we want to make sure everything is safe. So absolutely, great comment.
Okay, thanks.
all right, let me clear this off so we can see. Mark Durnick. I'm sorry if I butchered that.
I've got a couple of questions. I know it's written someplace, but I wonder if you can tell me how many parking spots do we believe we are going to lose in the option 1 configuration generally? I understand.
Sure. So have that. Let me just open that up for you. So right now, the estimated count is about 430 overall in the garage, right? It's a little bit different on each level. Overall, you would probably lose, it's about 80, we're saying approximately 80 spaces. And that is dependent on, so I should give you a range to be fair. And that range is going to be 30, 40 to 80. And I say that because we identified if the transit hub is in the garage, or actually whether it is or isn't, there's a couple different pedestrian pathways and access points for people to get from Main Street. This is one of the connection points we looked at. From Main Street, you have that space that's that takes you from Main Street through to the bridge, right? And so from there, one of the paths we went through was, well, how would someone get from there to the level that they parked on in the garage or the transit hub if it was in the retrofit into the garage? And so we identified and designed in a couple of pedestrian pathways. Now, if we were to utilize instead an external pathway, which would take you down the bridge and along where the Water Street ramp is right now, which is planned to be improved, right? It'd be on the exterior, which is planned to be improved for safety, for lighting, for just general access around the garage itself. You would not lose as many spaces. That's just hence the reason I gave you the range.
Terrific. Let me just follow up, if I could, with a couple of other questions more
Sure.
about option number 2. Is there weather protection for pedestrians that would be moving from the across Chestnut Street to the buses?
No, there's nothing that would span the street on that case.
Okay. And you had mentioned the Chestnut Street, Chestnut Street extension piece currently having a little bit more of a value for retail. Were you looking at retail being in that one side that faces Chestnut Street extension?
No, it's trying to encourage people from Main Street onto the backside of Clinton Plaza, but then also down to Market. So the building itself is encouraging the movement between all the retails and making it more accessible and quite honestly, like a nicer pedestrian experience to really have people want to go between those. Mm-hmm. But then again, as I was mentioning in option 2, there's a potential for future development on that green space that could, be adjacent to Clinton Plaza. That could have retail or whatever it might be, as Liz is trying to go to it now.
Yep.
Go one more up to the site plan there, Liz. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
What I'm referring to is right here, you could see on the second level, or even on the first level, you could see retail going here or retail going along this area here. So there's potential in the future if there was development there,
okay.
But not in the building itself.
Gotcha. And the very last question is related to that. You mentioned early in the presentation that transit hubs had a way of spurring economic activity. Do you have any examples of the types of economic activity that have been spurred by a transit hub?
Quite numerous, yeah. So the one thing I want to say on this, though, is transit done right will spur economic development. Transit done wrong will not. And that's about as plainly put as you can do it. So, a couple projects that we've worked on, 2 come to mind. One is Petersburg, Virginia. One is Savannah, Georgia.
And Broome County, Binghamton Intermittent.
Binghamton,
right? New
yes,
York State
Binghamton.
is a great example.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Right around the corner, too.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all examples of transit projects that had immediate impacts on the area, really changed the outlook. And, Savannah, Georgia, you could say, wow, it's this really great happening city. I mean, it's a beautiful city, but the area we built in was not great. and there was vacant land everywhere surrounding it. As soon as we built the transit center, and this is not a joke, and we have a slide that we can send you later if you're interested. Within the shovel in the ground, developers got interested across the street. Actually, 2 adjacent parcels, they built hotels. Retail opened up on a corner that was vacant. Another vacant building behind it was immediately bought for another potential opportunity to support the transit hub, which was a movie studio. And then the other vacant land, I'm trying to think what went there. I'm drawing a blank now, but this was immediate. Like shovel in the ground, they saw it, and they started building. Petersburg's the same thing. Petersburg was in downtown, wasn't that great of an area, but it spurred development. They built apartment buildings directly adjacent to it. In fact, one of the advertisements was, you can live next to the transit center and take the bus. That was their advertisement. And Liz, you can speak better to Binghamton because
Sure.
you directly worked on that one.
Yeah, so the area, what was the existing transit hub or bus station really is what it was in Binghamton, was a really, I say despot. It was hard. It was low income, and it was just not a nice place to be all the time. There were certain components of it that really anchored it. And I can remember I went to SUNY Brockport. My cousin went to Binghamton University, and I took the bus. And so that was my first experience of the bus station in Binghamton. And then to, I don't know, 5-6 years later, work for Wendel and actually work on the Binghamton station itself, see it transform. What it did was it took one whole city block and redeveloped. It enlarged the transit hub. It put a second floor on it. It allowed for like there was a diner in it and some other retail. They used the second floor for community space. And how ironic is this? The DMV is now in the transit hub building, the public transit hub building. The area itself is now more of a hustle and bustle. They're busting at the seams there, in fact, and are now trying to look into, other satellites and whatnot. But I would love to even put you in touch with Greg Kilmer, who now is in charge there, and he can just tell you what an impact that's really had there, where the amount of restaurants and living and things have spurred up around it now, and it's become someplace where people want to be, and they intentionally go still to that diner, not necessarily even to use public transit, but to go eat there. So there's a lot of, and he can give you some other great examples as well.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one moment. Let me see your faces again. Do we have any other questions or comments? Or anything else from the city, David, Judy, Greg, that you may want to add or question or mention? Yes, Len.
Well, Elizabeth, after tonight, what is the timetable with respect to Wendell and the city of Oneonta?
Sure. So to wrap up the study, which is what we're contracted for. So after this week's period of time where the public has the ability to comment and question on the report itself and the presentation, we'll respond to those comments and finalize the report, which will then be about 2 weeks after that. So I think that takes us to, October 14th, I want to say. Yes. October 14th, at which point we'll have delivered the final report to the city. And then as far as next steps for moving on with another phase or a next phase, I can let the city speak to that and how they plan to move forward. But I know in our discussions that there is a plan to move forward to a next phase, and we were looking to you folks tonight to really provide your input and review and helping, make a decision of sort of how to proceed.
Sure. So typically, do you provide hard copies at this point, at this juncture, to council members?
We can provide hard copy reports. Yes, we don't generally, but if it's a request, it's certainly not a problem.
You mentioned early on in your presentation that there was a sanitary pump station located on Market Street. I didn't get a chance, since we just got the electronic file yesterday, I believe it was, so I didn't get a chance to make it through all 60 pages. What's the cost on just that alone?
Off the top of my head, Len, I do not know, but
I don't remember either. We're not moving it right now, though. In
correct.
the current scheme, it's staying where it is right now. There's some modifications because you have to modify it slightly because of how the buses would go near it, but it's not being moved at the moment.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, it is planned to remain, and it actually would be located on one of the bus islands so that it would be avoided by traffic.
Okay. And that would not hinder maintenance?
We talked about that, and actually, it's not that it would need to be maintained too often that it would shut down bus operations or impede on them. But once in a while, when it does need to be maintenance, there would need to be other, I guess, routing, or other buses would need to use maybe different bays than normal during an operation of maintenance or
because you have to pull the vehicle to it. There's things you have to do that. So yes, that there is some reconfiguration, as Liz is saying, to operations at that time, but we know it's infrequent. So, and it can be planned essentially.
Okay. Given that we live in upstate New York and road salt seems to be a component of our winter life, and with the building materials that you folks have chosen, what do you think the legacy costs are for the city of Oneonta? Maybe on an annual basis or every 10 years?
Or you mean just upkeep? Or
sure. I mean, because you're basically asking us to do a major remodel of a structure that's been there since 1975.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to invest approximately minimum $10.3 million. So I would just like to know what our legacy responsibilities would be on this project.
I don't have that exact answer. Do you, Liz?
No, so that is not part of the cost estimate effort for the project scope. However, the rehabilitation of the garage is about 4.5 million versus if you were to put the transit hub in there, and then that's what takes it to the 10. So therefore, the garage rehabilitation itself is less than the 10, and if it was regularly maintained, and when we specify and when we design and choose materiality for especially exterior fronts of buildings, we do so in a manner that takes into consideration weather and inclement weather and how it will hold up over time. And so therefore, not designing something that you're going to have to constantly pour money into. But the recommendation from us at this point would be that if you invest the money to rehabilitate, you keep up with it. And it's something that's regularly maintained, therefore to limit your costs. So,
right. And so I don't mean to cut you off, but that's my point is, like, what would we be looking at? I know that drainage from probably day one has always been an issue.
Yeah. So drainage, do you mean like plumbing, like building drainage itself?
Right. The actual parking lot sanitation lines to take that away. The road salt has caused, obvious damage to the structural. It was good to hear that you said that the bones of the structure is good. But obviously we have to move forward and recoat them, rehabilitate them. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around what are we going to be looking at on an annual basis, and obviously this must be something that you're trying to talk about with our city engineering department, but I was just curious if you had a number, and that's okay.
Yeah, we don't. The one thing we would do or we'd want to do, and a lot of things we do for transit facilities, is give you kind of like what the maintenance plan is, like how you need to maintain it each year. That's going to help extend its life. Because the questions you're asking are good, and I will tell you, no matter what we do, it will require maintenance. That no matter what we do, It's every project I work on, we always say, look, you've got to have a maintenance plan. If you do, your building will extend for a long period of time. It could be such thing as like, after, spring comes, make sure you get out there and you pressure wash everything, get the salts down and clean it up, because the longer it sits there, the more it erodes, right? We know that. And that would probably be something we would recommend as part of this, the next phase and after construction. So you have a plan to go forward to keep it up. And, part of that plan can be like, this is what it's going to cost you on a yearly basis to do this.
Right.
Because, there are tests, there are other things that have to be done, just typically you'd want to do just to make sure it's working okay. And elevator maintenance is one. What's your contract on an elevator?
The other thing I want to point out too, is part of whatever improvements you put into the existing structure. Several of the systems are beyond their useful life, and therefore you'd be at a good new starting point. So you're not dealing with a system that's already 10 years old, and now you've got only another 10 years until you do have to do something more with it. So, it's not great, because a lot of, like I said, the systems are beyond their useful life, although they're still, and you'll read in the report, they're still operating beautifully, like the generator, for example. But that would be one item you'd want to look at anyway, to properly size. And if you needed to replace it, if you're putting a transit hub in there and you needed to keep things, even if it was a standby generator, for example. But so there's a lot of, there's different decisions that drive what those legacy costs might be.
And I guess my last question is that a diagram or a drawing of the city of Oneonta behind you?
It is not. And in
It's
fact, this is actually the town of Lancaster, city of Lancaster,
Okay.
in Buffalo, New York. It's a suburb of Buffalo, New York. It's where my husband grew up, and his family owns a lot of land there. So he had this map framed, and is very proud. And I hung it in the basement.
I'm looking at your map, and I have one over here because we're remodeling our living room, and I'm like, boy, that looks like the same one that I have. But
Yeah.
and again, as Dave said earlier, I appreciate everybody's hard work that you put on this project. So thank you.
Thank you. Mark Davies.
Thanks. I just have one question. So as you were looking at the existing structure, and I know you went through and rated it and was able to read through those ratings, and it seemed like for the most part things were pretty good. Few poor things, but mostly pretty good. And beginning to think about some of the fixes. Do you have any estimates about what these fixes, if they're made, how long would this structure last moving forward? I guess I'd be concerned about building a brand new structure into this that would presumably last 40, 50 years, and yet our parking garage in 15, 20 years is crumbling around it. So what's your estimate for the lifespan of the parking garage once these fixes are created?
That's a great question. So
part of that answer, if I can jump in for a second, part of that is how you maintain it on a yearly basis. To be quite honest with you, if you did nothing, I mean, I know it's been maintained over its years, and the city has done a lot of work to try to keep up with it, right? And it's roughly 50 years old. So, the new materials that we use now have a longer life. Part of it is how well are they installed? I don't mean to give you an answer like this, but part of it is making sure they're installed correctly, because materials can last a long time if used correctly. And then how well you maintain it. It could last another 50 years. It's going to take replacement. I mean, most parts and things, when you think about it nowadays, are what, 10 to 20 years. That's about their lifespan.
Right.
And then you have to replace some pieces. Some things last longer. So yeah, you're going to get another 50 years out of this if you maintain it, just like is done now. I mean, it's there right now and in good shape. So yeah, I can see it. And Liz, I don't know if you have any other thing to add on this, but I would say you can do 50 with maintenance. And, again, there's going to be things that the car surface, that only is going to last so long because you're going to beat it down with salt, you're going to beat it with cars, and the sun's going to do degradation on it. So yeah, that's going to have to be replaced sooner. So depending on what it is, it's got a sooner replacement cost. But if you do that, yeah, it's going to last another 50 years.
Yeah, and one of the, I would agree with that. One of the main things, actually, that we've found from our observations and information we have that actually drives a lot of your water issues there is the storm drainage system itself and the failure of it, and therefore water penetrating the concrete slab and getting into areas it shouldn't, causing deterioration in areas that it shouldn't. If the system was well working. So I think that the complements and reiterates what Sean is saying is that if you have working systems and you are constantly not say constantly, but if we are keeping up with maintenance and we're not allowing for leaks for one reason or another, or things like that, it will last. And then you'll notice in our report we do tell you we recommend replacing the storm drainage system because it is in need of that with specific piping that would last you another 20, 30, what have you years. And you won't see and you won't get that leaking and that rusting that you see now. And the icicles dripping. We actually have a photo of icicles dripping from the piping, from the water leaking. So there's certain things that cause deterioration in other areas that could be avoided as long as maintenance isn't kept up.
Yeah, the other thing I want to point out, because drainage is important, but the expansion joints that are in there.
Yes.
I mean, those are the things that keep me up at night when we're designing a facility and doing the details, because that's where problems happen. And, a lot of times, again, if it's installed correctly and you do the right application, those expansion joints are going to last, 10 to 20 years. And maybe that doesn't sound like a long time for an expansion joint, but considering the amount of traffic and what it does and the amount of movement it takes, that's a long time, right? It gets a lot of abuse. Those have to be done right. And again, as Liz said, if you can get the water flowing to the pipes in a way, that's the best thing. Water can destroy a facility quicker than anything. Everybody knows this. It's like everybody's house. Like, water is the worst thing you can have. Like, getting to your house is bad for you, right? So those are the things that are really important to truly extending the life beyond. I think Scott has a question, Liz.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
I think you alluded to it, and I apologize because I had to leave the presentation for a minute.
Sure.
What is the contingency for this? Because I'm just thinking, being one of the probably few on the call that was born and raised here, since the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, early 2000s, it seems like they would do a study about the parking garage, and it was always said it's at the end of its useful life. It's got to be completely torn down. It's got to be completely redone. And then you guys come in and say, well, no, the bones are pretty good. So there's just that, I guess it's more of a peace of a mind thing, because I kind of rather do a job and do it right, even if it's going to cost a little bit more now up front than if we start into a project and all of a sudden we are tearing it down and we got one I-beam that's good and everything else had to go. I guess if you just help me a little bit, I guess it's more of a peace of a mind.
No, that's a great question. And to be very candid with you, if this structure really needed to come down, we would have told you that. Structurally, our engineer would have said, this is it's just not going to last. So that's not the case. Now, on the opposite hand, there is a significant amount of work to restore it to a proper functioning and aesthetically pleasing, and from a maintenance perspective, there is an investment there. The contingency at this point, during conceptual design, we did a lot for 25%. That's overall. So in generally, and that can go up. We can, the city can say, you know what, I want to, it'd be good, or you from the council would say, you know what, at this point, let's increase it to 30 because as we had this conversation, to be honest with you, with the mayor and some of the other city representatives here tonight, you know, are we comfortable with the rehab estimate at this point? And what we'll tell you is, yes, and with existing structures, no matter whether it's a garage or I do a lot of work, I'm doing some large work locally here in Buffalo on existing structures, and there are unforeseen conditions. It's actually in construction in general, and most of you probably know you will come across things on site, and you just that's what your contingency is there for. You address unforeseen conditions, but you try to get ahead of them. You identify what you can up front. You manage and you mitigate, and if there's nothing else that can be done, there is contingency to address whatever unforeseen conditions do pop up. Sean, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Well, it's inevitable something's going to pop up like that. And again, that's what contingency is for. And there's also, just so everybody understands, you know, when we're at this level, there's a lot of guesses as to what we're going to do. And that's what the contingency is there for. Because, you know, we might say, you know, we want to use this, or I didn't have a good example on it, but that's what the contingency covers us, is one, for the unforeseeable conditions as we do a more investigative survey later. We've done it enough, and Liz said it exactly correctly. The structure's in good condition right now. Everything was looked at. We're not concerned that, you know, all of a sudden we're going to find a beam that's bad and has to come out. That's not the case. What we're going to find is, you know, this, I don't know, like the railing on the stair, or the stair's not wide enough and we have to move a wall or change the run of a stair or something like that. Those are things that we might find. But I don't see anything else coming from it that's catastrophic or something like that. It's going to be the little things. The little things add up, and that's what the contingency covers.
They do. And there is, and you'll read in section 3 where we talk about the conditions assessment, and each of the engineers authored that. So that's coming directly from them. You know, there are some floor beams that do need to be repaired, along with concrete slab and some expansion joint repairs. And so there are repairs that are either need to be done just because of time over the lifespan of the facility, and then some due to as a result of other causes like water damage, etc. So I think it just depends. I hope that answered your question.
Liz, I think Len has his hand up.
Yes, Len.
Luke, before I go, I didn't want to overstep your turn. Did you? Okay. So Sean and Elizabeth, I just wanted to, one last follow-up question is, I just went back while everybody was talking and looked at the diagrams again. I don't see any solar panels. Was there ever any discussion about a little bit of green here, so we could have some green energy? That's a lot of real estate. I think it would also help for maybe protection of the vehicles if we had solar panels up there.
Yes, we did. We did look into that. It was a discussion. In fact, I think Greg had brought that up. One of the things about solar, well, a couple of things about solar panels that we discussed as part of this project. Obviously, they would need to go above the top level of the garage. They are heavy. So the existing structure itself would need to be studied further as to whether or not it could take the weight of solar panels, and if so, how many. The second thing is the position and the orientation. So taking into consideration how much sun it gets during the day, directional weather, and so on. And really, what is the payback that you get from it, right? So there's generally a significant cost with solar panel. We did not study it intensively, but it was an option. We did discuss it. Greg, I don't know if you have anything that you would like to add at this point in the design, it was not part of the design or the cost.
Yeah, I don't really have to add, Liz, other than obviously we did take a look at that. And I think it's still something that we could look at further, as Liz suggested, when we get into the next phase of design and get a chance to do some more detailed structural analysis to see if.
Yeah. And perhaps, right. And you know, perhaps if the direction is, well, we really like a separate transit hub on the corner of Market and Chestnut, then perhaps we look at that building for some solar atop the roof.
Yeah, and just to kind of go into, so you look at the steel's holding the cars and it has the snow load and all that. What's the extra capacity? That's really what it comes down to. And that's, you know, without doing an in-depth study on the steel, you don't know if it has the extra capacity for it to put the steel up there to hold the canopy. And it'll be part of the canopy, because depending on how you design the canopy, that can be very different, because you can get a lot of uplift on these things. So those are all things that have to be considered. But in the next phase, if that's something that you'd want to be studied, that absolutely could be. You know, it's not ruled out. We just don't know the exact capacity of the steel right now.
And I'm sorry, Sean, did you say, you did mention canopy, so there even is potentially a position to place them atop the bus bay canopies?
Absolutely. Yeah, they can go up on top of the bus canopies without an issue, because right, that's a new design, not a problem. That would be designed for it if you wanted to. It's just the car parking with existing steel. You don't know until you really get into it, and they use the calipers and they figure everything out and do the full calculation.
Okay. Luke, did you have anything?
I don't think so. I read over the report. I'm still kind of digesting a lot of it.
Yep.
I managed to get through most of it. And I don't think I have any questions at this time, but I'm still, to be honest with you, I didn't get a chance to read it until later this afternoon today. So I still am digesting quite a bit of information.
No problem. I didn't want to, if your hand was up, and I see Scott's is up now, I just didn't want to pass over you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Scott?
I just want to piggyback on Len a little bit here. With the heating and the HVAC system, just thinking a little bit greener here. Was that a geothermal, or is that just regular, like a natural gas heating and an AC, or what are you guys kind of thinking there?
For the garage?
Yeah.
I think it means for the transit building.
The transit hub.
Oh, okay. So the garage, there is no, there's really no true HVAC system in the garage right now. And in fact, it's not sprinklered either. So the main portion of what we call mechanical engineering has to do with the plumbing. And
but he's asking Liz, for the transit center, did we consider geothermal to heat?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And the simple answer to that is, right now it is, it's the base system. Geothermal is not considered in that at the moment. We did not evaluate that of, you know, is that an option, what the payback is, you know, how far down you have to go, because they, I know we didn't look at that. Again, it could be studied, absolutely be an option that could be added to know, because, you know, it's a really good question. What's the cost now and what's the payback? You know, Liz mentioned it with photovoltaics, because if there's a lot of credits from the state or somewhere else from the utilities, and it pays itself back in 5 years, then it's a great expense, right?
Yeah.
Then you do it, of course. But that has to be looked at, and there's so many different programs on that right now, and I see a lot of houses doing it because the programs are out there and it's really cost effective to do it. So yeah, that could absolutely be looked at in the next phase.
Okay, it looks like we're about at an hour and a half now. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sean. One of the things that you touched upon, but I want to point out to everybody, is during the past year and a half, I guess it's been a year and a half, although it's only a year, we really put the folks from Wendel through their paces. We explored every possible site in downtown Oneonta where you could possibly put this transit hub, from the Stella Luna restaurant to the Clarion Hotel property. We even considered the demolition of the Sydney Federal Credit Union and trying to put it there. Everything was considered, and and every case where they reached what Liz referred to as a fatal flaw. It was very frustrating, but we had to ask them to start over multiple times, and I give them credit because they never yelled at us. They never threw anything at us, but we asked them to start over at least a half a dozen times. And then finally, when they came up with the plan for putting the transit hub in the parking garage, which is an outstanding plan, one of the things I said was, that cannot be the only option if you're going to lose 40 to 80 parking spaces. You have to come up with another option because that may not be accessible to the people of the city. So, that's why they had to come up with an additional option. So I just want to recognize and thank them because this went way above and beyond, I'm sure, what they expected and what they normally do, because we had a lot of stops and starts, in the course of the last year and a half. And before we go, I just want to give the final word to our transit director, Dave Hoteling, because this is going to affect him more than anybody. And so just your words, David, on how you see this affecting your operation, the pluses and minuses that you may see in it.
Thank you, Gary. Geez, I wasn't ready for this. Well, we're very excited. This could be a good thing for us. Would definitely give us much more room, much more accessibility, much safer. What we're doing now is just not safe. Pulling out into the traffic the way we do. We see many very close to near misses there. I just think overall it'll be a much better flow of things, and it will work very nicely for my employees and for the city in general.
Okay, so with that, we are looking for public comments or questions, council members as well. As you think it through over the next week and have comments or questions, you can either go through the email info, the email address, or you can send them, directly to me, and I'll compile them and pass them on to Liz and to Sean. And then the next steps will be that the council will need to talk about next steps, where we go from here. Luke, looks like you've got a question.
I always do this. I'm so sorry. It's the very, very end and I think of something.
That's okay.
Liz and Sean, would it be possible for you to send us your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes,
Thank
we
you very
can
much.
do that. No problem.
Okay, so with that, I think this was well spent 90 minutes. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sean, for an excellent presentation and for all you've done for us in the last 18 months. And this is exciting. We're now finally moving on to a new phase. So
very exciting.
And again, as I said, this has been 5 years in the making just to get to this point. So with that, thank you to everybody. And I'll check with John Rafter and Katie Lapari-Shu, who weren't able to be here. Let them know that this has been recorded. They certainly can catch up by watching it on YouTube. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Nice meeting everybody. Thank you. Have a good night.